The battlefield of silence, the sky was black with smoke. The battlefield stretched endlessly, a wasteland of broken machines, burned earth, and the lifeless bodies of soldiers from both sides. The smell of metal and blood mixed in the air, heavy and sharp. Somewhere among the ruins lay Kareth, a warrior of the Dravik people. Her armor cracked, and her body wounded. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale sharp with pain. Her vision blurred, showing nothing but shadows and red light. From distant fires, the last thing she remembered was the explosion. Her unit had been ambushed. The ground shaking under the force of the blast. She had fallen, unable to move. Her comrades cut down one by one. Now there was nothing, no shouts, no commands. Only the low sound of the wind carrying ash. The war had passed over this place, leaving her in silence. She knew what this meant. She had been left behind. Her right hand twitched, reaching for her blade. The weapon was only a few inches away, but her fingers would not close around it. Her body refused to obey. She stared at the sky through the broken visor of her helmet. Dark clouds rolled over the horizon, carrying the smell of an approaching storm. If the enemy found her like this, she would not see another sunrise. Then she heard its footsteps, slow, careful steps, crunching over broken glass and debris. Kareth's heart pounded, her mind sharpening despite the pain. She forced her arm to move, reaching again for the blade. The sound grew closer. One step, then another, through the smoke. A figure appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying something slung across his back. Not Dravik, not one of hers. Human. Her first thought was that he had come to finish her. The humans were enemies in this war, brutal and efficient. They had no reason to save a Dravik warrior. Her lips curled into a weak snarl, ready to face her end. But the man didn't raise his weapon. Instead, he crouched beside her, studying her wounds with a frown. His eyes were steady, calm, and strangely concerned. "You're hurt," he said quietly, his voice deep but gentle. Kareth blinked at him in confusion. He reached out, resting his gloved hand on her shoulder plate. She flinched at the contact, every instinct telling her to fight. But her body was too weak, her strength gone. The human studied her face, then without hesitation, began to lift her from the ground. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice dry and cracked. "Getting you out of here," he replied simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Her mind spun. Why would a human risk himself for her? She was the enemy. She had fought against his people only hours ago, but his arms were strong and steady as he carried her. His movements careful, avoiding the jagged metal and fallen rubble around them. The ruins groaned under the weight of broken walls. Distant thunder rumbled, mixing with the faint echoes of battle somewhere far away. Kareth wanted to tell him to leave her, to run before the enemy returned, but no words came. Her head rested against his chest, and she could hear the steady beat of his heart. It was strangely grounding, pulling her back from the edge of darkness. They moved through what remained of a destroyed city, windows shattered, streets torn apart by artillery fire. Now and then, the human paused, listening for danger. He moved with the precision of a trained soldier, fast when the way was clear, silent when shadows moved. The smoke made her cough, each breath scraping her throat. He adjusted his hold on her, keeping her close to shield her from the dust. Kareth's eyes half closed, her mind drifting. Her people would call her a disgrace for allowing an enemy to carry her, but deep inside, she knew she had no choice without him. She would already be gone. She felt his hand shift against her back, supporting her weight without complaint. He was strong, far stronger than she expected from a human. Every step he took seemed determined, as if he had already decided her fate. A loud crack split the air, a sniper's shot. The human instantly moved, pressing her against a wall, and staying perfectly still. Kareth could feel his breath near her ear, steady even under fire. He waited, counting the seconds, then moved. Again, choosing a different path. The way he moved told her he had done this before, many times. Who was this man? The rain began to fall, at first just a few drops, then heavy sheets. Washing away the blood and ash from her armor, the storm rolled in fully now, thunder shaking the ground. Still, he carried her, step after step, his boots splashing in the muddy water. Finally, when her eyes closed completely, she heard his voice one last time before sleep took her. "You're not dying here," he said, his tone certain and unshakable. "Not today." The rain poured harder, running down Aaron's face and dripping from the edges of his helmet. Kurith was still in his arms, her head resting against his shoulder, her breathing slow but uneven. Every step he took sank into the mud, making his legs heavy, but he kept moving. The battlefield was behind them, but danger was not. Smoke still rose from the ruined city. Somewhere in the distance, artillery fired again, lighting the horizon with flashes of orange. Aaron knew enemy patrols would soon sweep through this area to find survivors and finish them. He needed to move fast, but he also needed to keep her alive. Her armor was broken in several places, her blood mixing with the rainwater running off her body. A collapsed wall blocked the path ahead. Aaron crouched, shifting her weight carefully so he could climb over without dropping her. His boots slipped on the wet stone, but he steadied himself. Every sound they made felt too loud. Kareth stirred in his arms, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why? Help me," she asked, her alien words broken, but clear enough for him to understand. Aaron didn't look at her, his eyes scanning the road ahead. "Because leaving you here would make me no better than the people who did this," he said simply. She didn't reply, but her gaze lingered on him, as if trying to read the truth in his expression. The rain made it harder to see, but Aaron spotted movement ahead, flickers of red lights between the smoke, enemy drones. He cursed under his breath and ducked into a side street. The narrow alley was filled with debris, some parts still burning from earlier strikes. Heat pressed against him even as the rain cooled his skin. He pulled his cloak around Kareth to hide her from the drones above. The sound of the machines grew louder. Aaron pressed himself against the wall, holding her tightly as shadows passed overhead. A sharp beam of light swept the street, just missing them when it was gone. He exhaled slowly. One mistake and they'd both be dead. The alley opened to a large intersection, but the road was gone, replaced by a collapsed bridge. Below it, rivers of fire burned from ruptured fuel lines. The heat was unbearable. Kareth's eyes opened again, and she weakly pointed across the gap. On the other side was a narrow path that led into the ruins of a train depot, a possible escape. Aaron scanned the gap, judging the distance. It wasn't far, but the bridge was unstable, half of it already gone. "We're running out of time," he muttered. Enemy voices were now audible behind them, boots splashing through puddles. He took a deep breath, adjusted his grip on her, and whispered, "Hold on to me." Before she could respond, he sprinted forward, his boots pounding on the broken concrete. The bridge groaned under his weight, cracks spreading as pieces fell into the fire below. Kareth clenched her good arm around his neck, feeling the drop just inches away. They reached the middle when an explosion ripped through the far end. The shockwave knocked Aaron sideways. For a moment, his boots slipped on the wet surface, but he tightened his hold on her and pushed forward. Ignoring the pain shooting up his leg, he leaped the final gap, landing hard on the other side. The bridge collapsed behind them with a deafening roar. Aaron didn't stop to rest. The depot loomed ahead, its large roof half collapsed. Inside, broken train cars lay twisted and burned, offering plenty of places to hide. He ducked into one of the carriages, the air thick with the smell of rust and oil. Finally, he lowered Kareth onto a seat, her head tilting back against the wall. Her eyes followed him as he checked the entrance for signs of pursuit. "You should leave me," she said weakly. Aaron glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Not happening," he replied. She frowned, confused by the certainty in his voice. Her people and humans were sworn enemies, yet here he was, risking his life for her. The sound of footsteps echoed outside the depot. Aaron moved quickly, crouching low and peering through a shattered window. 3 enemy soldiers entered the building, their weapons raised. Kareth's eyes widened, but Aaron held a finger to his lips. He moved silently toward the far side of the carriage, his rifle ready. 1 soldier passed dangerously close. Aaron's hand tightened on the trigger, but he waited. Patience was survival. The enemies eventually moved toward the collapsed roof. Searching elsewhere, Aaron returned to her side. "We can't stay here long," he said, helping her up again. She tried to walk, but stumbled, her strength gone. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms once more. Her pride stung at the gesture, but she no longer had the strength to resist as they slipped out through the depot's rear exit. The rain eased, the fires behind them burned lower, leaving only smoke and glowing embers. But Aaron knew the worst was still ahead. The city was still enemy territory, and getting her out alive would take more than luck. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. Aaron moved quickly, keeping Kareth close to his chest, his eyes scanning every shadow. The depot was now behind them, but the city was still a maze of danger. Every broken wall and twisted metal beam felt like it could hide an enemy. Kareth's head rested against him, her breaths shallow. Her body was heavy, not from weight alone, but from the way life seemed to slip from her a little more each minute. Aaron knew she needed shelter, somewhere hidden, somewhere safe enough to stop the bleeding. His mind raced through the layout of the city. He remembered passing a transport carrier during his last patrol, one that had been half buried under rubble after a bombing. If it was still there, it could be the perfect hiding place. The streets were quiet, except for the occasional distant echo of gunfire. The silence felt wrong. It was the kind of silence that made soldiers grip their weapons tighter. Aaron's boots splashed in shallow puddles as he moved, staying close to the walls to avoid open streets. Kareth stirred slightly in his arms, her voice rasping. "You could leave me and live," she whispered, her eyes half open. Aaron glanced down at her, his tone calm but firm. "Not my style," he said. Her brow furrowed as if she didn't understand the meaning, but she didn't press further. The cold rain clung to her armor, mixing with the dark streaks of blood. They turned a corner, and there it was, the transport carrier. Its metal frame was tilted to one side, half of it buried under a collapsed wall. The outer hatch hung open, just enough for someone to slip through. Aaron approached quickly, lowering Kareth to lean against a wall, while he checked the inside. The carrier smelled of damp metal and burnt wiring, but it was intact enough to keep them hidden. He returned to her and carefully lifted her again, carrying her inside. Once they were in, he shut the hatch as quietly as possible, sealing them in darkness. Only faint light came through a small crack in the wall. Aaron lowered her onto one of the benches, his hands already reaching for the small medical kit strapped to his side. Kareth's breathing was uneven, her eyes watching him cautiously. "Why risk enemy?" she asked again, her voice struggling against exhaustion. Aaron didn't look at her as he began cutting away damaged pieces of her armor to reach the wounds beneath. "Because I made a promise a long time ago," he said simply. "To who?" she pressed. Aaron paused for a second, his jaw tightening. "To someone I couldn't save," he replied, his voice low. Kareth stared at him, but said nothing. Her injuries were bad, a deep cut along her side, a burn across her shoulder, and several smaller wounds from shrapnel. Aaron worked quickly, cleaning each injury and wrapping it in bandages from his kit. She winced at the sting of the antiseptic, her sharp teeth gritting together. "You fight well. For human," she murmured, "and you're still alive." "For someone who just called me enemy," he replied with a faint smirk. She didn't know whether to be insulted or amused. A distant sound made both their heads turn. Boots, voices. Aaron moved instantly, putting a finger to his lips and motioning for her to stay silent. He slid to the far side of the carrier, peeking through a narrow gap in the wall. 3 enemy soldiers were walking down the street, scanning the ruins with flashlights. Their beams swept dangerously close to the carrier's hatch. Kareth's hand instinctively went to her missing blade, but Aaron shook his head, fighting. Now would only get them both killed. The soldiers paused near the carrier, their voices low but tense. One of them kicked a piece of rubble, letting it clatter loudly in the rain. Aaron held his breath, his finger resting near the trigger of his rifle. Kareth's gaze was fixed on him, seeing how still he became, how focused. The soldiers lingered for a few moments, then slowly moved on, their voices fading into the distance. Aaron exhaled slowly, returning to her side. That was close. He whispered. Kareth tilted her head, studying him. You, not afraid? She asked. Aaron gave a small shrug. I've been in worse situations, he said, though his eyes told a different story, one of someone who had learned to hide fear behind control. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside softened, replaced by the low hum of the wind through broken streets. Aaron leaned back against the wall, watching her. You need to rest, he said. I cannot, she replied, her voice heavy. Sleep, he insisted. His tone left no room for argument, and her eyes slowly closed. Aaron kept watch, his rifle across his knees. The storm had passed for now, but the real danger still surrounded them. Tomorrow, they would have to move again. For now, this dark, broken transport was their only shelter, their only shadow in a city full of eyes. The night was cold and heavy inside the wrecked transport carrier. The air was damp and filled with the faint smell of rust. Aaron sat near the hatch, his back against the wall, his rifle across his lap. Kareth was lying on the bench, her breathing slow but still uneven. The soft rhythm of rain against the metal was the only sound in the darkness. Aaron didn't sleep. His mind was alert, his ears tuned to every faint movement outside. The city could be quiet one moment and deadly the next. In places like this, survival depended on noticing danger before it noticed you. Sometime after midnight, he heard it, the faint crunch of boots on wet rubble. It was too slow and deliberate to be the wind or an animal. Aaron froze, his hand tightening around the grip of his rifle. Through the crack in the wall, a dim beam of light cut across the street. Someone was searching. Kareth's eyes fluttered open, sensing the change in his posture. He gave her a silent hand signal. Stay low, stay quiet. The footsteps drew closer, joined by a second set. Voices whispered in a language Aaron didn't know. Then the sound of metal scraping against metal. Someone was touching the outer hatch. Aaron's pulse quickened. There was no way out except through the front, and that was where the enemy was. He moved slowly, positioning himself near the entrance. Kareth tried to sit up, but he shook his head sharply. He mouthed the words, "Trust me." The first knock against the hatch was light. Testing. The second was harder, the sound echoing inside the carrier like a drum. Aaron heard the faint hiss of a weapon's power core charging. Whoever was out there wasn't just checking for survivors, they were ready to kill. The latch began to move. Aaron gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay still until the right moment. As soon as the door cracked open, a gloved hand pushing inside, he struck. With a swift motion, he grabbed the intruder's arm, yanked them forward, and slammed the butt of his rifle into their face. The soldier collapsed halfway inside. Dazed, the second enemy shouted in alarm. Raising his weapon, Aaron fired 2 quick shots, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Kareth flinched but kept silent. Her eyes locked on him as he moved with precise, controlled motions. The first soldier groaned, trying to rise. Aaron stepped forward, using his boot to shove the man out of the way and onto the street. The rain outside glistened against the soldier's armor as he fell, motionless. But there was a third voice now, another enemy calling out from further down the road. Aaron knew they had only seconds before reinforcements came. He turned to Kareth, his voice low but urgent. "We have to go." She tried to stand, but her legs gave out, without hesitation. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and lifted her into his arms again. The hatch was wide open now, the night air cold against their skin. Aaron stepped over the fallen soldier and darted into the shadows. Between two collapsed buildings. Behind them, shouts rose in the darkness. A flashlight beam swept past, missing them by inches. Aaron's boots splashed through shallow water, each step sending pain up his leg, but he didn't slow. They weaved through the narrow alley, stepping over piles of broken stone and twisted steel. Kareth clung to him, her fingers gripping his shoulder plate. "Why not leave me?" she whispered again. Aaron gave a small, almost amused exhale. "Because I'm not like them," he said. She stared at him, her sharp alien eyes searching his face. But before she could speak again, they heard another sound, the low hum of an engine. Aaron ducked behind a wall, just in time to see a patrol craft hover above the street ahead, its searchlights scanning every corner. The craft slowed near the alley, its lights dangerously close to where they hid. Aaron's heart pounded in his ears. He pressed his back to the wall, pulling Kareth even closer so her armor wouldn't reflect the light. The beam passed over them once, twice, then moved on. The craft rose higher, its hum fading into the night. Only then did Aaron move again. He carried her deeper into the ruins until he spotted another possible hiding spot, the hollow remains of a collapsed tower. Inside, the walls leaned awkwardly, but there was enough space to keep out of sight. He lowered her gently onto the ground and took a moment to catch his breath. Kareth's voice was quiet but steady now. "You fight like Dravik," she said. Aaron smirked faintly. "I'll take that as a compliment," he replied. Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile, before exhaustion pulled her back into silence. Outside, the enemy was still searching. Aaron knew they hadn't given up. The shelter was temporary, just like before. They would have to move again soon, but for now, in the shadows of the ruined tower, they had survived another night. Dawn broke with a pale, sickly light. The ruined city was still under a blanket of smoke, the air cold and heavy. Aaron had been awake the entire night, listening to distant gunfire and the hum of enemy patrol craft. Kareth had slept in uneasy bursts, her body still weak, but no longer bleeding as badly. When she opened her eyes, she saw him sitting nearby, rifle in hand, watching the street beyond the collapsed wall. "We move now," he said quietly. She pushed herself up with effort, wincing at the pain in her side. "Where?" she asked. Aaron glanced toward the horizon, where faint mountains cut across the sky. "Past the ravine," he replied. "There's an old supply outpost there, abandoned since the first wave of fighting." Kareth frowned. "The ravine of glass. Dangerous," she murmured. "I know," he said, "but it's the fastest way out." They began the march through the ruins. Aaron walked carefully, scanning for movement while supporting her weight with one arm. Kareth tried to walk on her own, but her legs were unsteady. Pride made her want to refuse his help. Yet every few steps her body betrayed her, and she had to lean against him. The streets were littered with broken machines, shattered armor, and twisted metal. They passed under skeletal remains of buildings, the sound of loose glass crunching under their boots. "Your people. You fight for them?" Kareth asked suddenly. Aaron gave a small shrug. "I fight for the ones next to me," he said. "Doesn't matter what planet they're from." She studied his face for a long moment, trying to understand that kind of loyalty. In her world, warriors fought only for their own kind, and yet this human was risking everything for her. Hours passed slowly. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows through the wreckage. At one point they had to stop, taking shelter under the remains of a stone archway while an enemy patrol passed by. Aaron held her close, his hand gently pressing her head down so her eyes wouldn't catch the light. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her armor. It was strange. She realized she no longer felt fear in his presence, only a strange, unfamiliar calm. When the patrol was gone, they moved again. By midday, the ruins began to thin out, replaced by cracked open plains, leading toward a jagged scar in the land, the ravine of glass. It shimmered even from a distance, sunlight catching on countless shards of crystal and fractured stone. Kareth's steps slowed. This place kills without warning, she said. Aaron nodded. The mines, sinkholes, and the ground itself, she replied. The glass can cut through armor like paper. They stood at the edge, looking down into the twisting paths between glittering walls. Aaron adjusted his grip on his rifle. You stay right behind me, he said firmly. Kareth gave a small smirk, despite her exhaustion. And if I don't, then you'll be walking on your own, he replied dryly. Her smirk faded into a faint smile, and she followed. The path was narrow, the ground uneven. Shards of crystal jutted from the earth at odd angles, some as tall as a man. Aaron moved slowly, testing each step before putting his full weight down. Kareth followed carefully, her eyes scanning for glints of metal wire, the sign of an old mine. They spoke little, the only sounds their boots crunching on the glass, and the faint hiss of the wind through the canyon. Halfway through, a distant rumble shook the ground. Aaron froze, holding up a hand. From somewhere deeper in the ravine, a section of glass wall broke apart, sending jagged fragments crashing down. They pressed themselves against the rock until the cascade ended. Kareth's breath came fast, her eyes wide. This place is cursed, she muttered. Just unfriendly, Aaron corrected, like most of the galaxy. As they continued, Kareth began to speak again, her voice quieter this time. In my clan, if someone is left behind, it is because they were too weak to live, she said. Aaron glanced over his shoulder at her. And what do you think now? She hesitated before answering. Now, I think maybe strength is also carrying someone else. For a moment, their eyes met. No words followed. But something shifted between them. It wasn't trust yet, not fully, but it was no longer just survival. By late afternoon, they reached the far side of the ravine. The ground leveled out, the glass giving way to dry, cracked soil. In the distance, the faint outline of the abandoned supply outpost stood against the sky. Aaron let out a slow breath. Almost there, he said. Kareth's gaze followed his, and for the first time since the battlefield, she felt the faint spark of hope. But as they approached, the wind carried a new sound, the low growl of vengeance. Aaron's expression hardened. There, ahead of us, he murmured. The long march wasn't over yet, and their safe haven might already be in enemy hands. The wind carried the deep growl of engines closer. Aaron and Kareth dropped low behind a ridge of cracked stone. From their position, they could see the outline of the abandoned supply outpost, and the enemy patrol vehicles parked right outside it. Figures in dark armor moved between the buildings, scanning the ground for tracks. It was clear they were searching for something. Or someone. Aaron's jaw tightened. That's our way out, he muttered. But it's crawling with them. Kareth's eyes narrowed. They'll find us if we stay here, she whispered. Aaron gave a short nod, adjusting his rifle. We move along the ridge. Keep out of sight. They crept forward, keeping low. The ridge offered some cover, but the ground was unstable. Shifting under their boots, Kareth's side ached with every movement, but she stayed silent. She could see Aaron's focus, the way his eyes never stopped scanning, the way he calculated each step. It reminded her of seasoned Dravik hunters, only this human was hunting for survival, not for sport. They were halfway across when the first shot rang out. A shard of stone exploded beside Aaron's head, sending splinters into the air. Sniper, down, Aaron barked, pulling Kareth to the ground. Another shot cracked, narrowly missing them. The ridge offered little protection now. Aaron glanced around, his mind racing. They had been spotted, and the enemy wasn't going to let them slip away. He raised his rifle, returning fire toward the sniper's position. The sound echoed sharply through the open land. Kareth could see the enemy shifting in response. Moving to flank them, more gunfire erupted, sending shards of stone flying over their heads. Aaron crawled forward, firing in short bursts to cover their retreat. But then, a thunderous explosion shook the ground. A hidden mine had detonated. Somewhere behind them, the shockwave threw them both sideways. Aaron landed hard. The impact, knocking the breath from his lungs. Pain shot through his side, but he forced himself to move. Kareth struggled to push herself up, her vision spinning. When she looked toward Aaron, her heart lurched. A jagged piece of shrapnel was lodged in his shoulder. Blood soaked his uniform, running down his arm in dark streams. "You're hurt," she hissed, crawling toward him. He shook his head, trying to push her away. "Keep moving," he said through clenched teeth, but his movements were slower now. His strength fading, the roles had shifted. He could no longer carry her. Without hesitation, Kareth hooked her arm under his and hauled him to his feet. He was heavier than she expected, but she didn't let go. They stumbled toward a cluster of shattered rock for cover, bullets sparking off the ground around them. Aaron tried to fire back, but his grip was unsteady. "Give me that," Kareth said, snatching the rifle from his hands. He looked at her in surprise. "Can you even?" The sharp crack of her first shot cut him off. One of the enemy soldiers dropped instantly. Her aim was raw, but deadly. Dravik warriors were trained from youth to throw spears and strike moving prey. A rifle wasn't so different in her hands. She covered their retreat, firing at anything that moved. Aaron leaned on her for support, the pain in his shoulder nearly blinding him. They reached the shelter of the rocks. Kareth forced Aaron down behind cover, her eyes scanning the ridge for the sniper. She spotted the glint of the enemy scope and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the glint vanished. The gunfire slowed, giving them a precious moment to breathe. Aaron slumped against the stone, his face pale. Kareth knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her own cloak to bind his wound. "You saved me," he muttered, his voice rough. She glanced at him sharply. "You saved me first," she replied, pulling the cloth tight. His lips curved into a faint smile despite the pain. "Guess we're even now." But they weren't safe yet. The rumble of engines grew louder again, more vehicles approaching from the far side of the outpost. Kareth helped Aaron to his feet, his weight heavy against her. "We can't fight them all," he said. "Then we run," she answered, determination burning in her voice. They moved along the rocks, keeping low until they reached the edge of a dry gully. It sloped sharply downward, leading away from the outpost and deeper into the wasteland. Behind them, shouts rang out. The enemy had spotted them again. Without hesitation, Kareth half pulled, half dragged Aaron down the slope. They slid and stumbled, rocks tumbling under their boots. Bullets kicked up dust around them, but they didn't stop. By the time they reached the bottom, the enemy's fire had slowed. The gully twisted, hiding them from view. Kareth kept moving until they found a narrow overhang of rock. She eased Aaron down against the wall, his breathing heavy. The fight had drained him, but he was still conscious. Kareth crouched beside him, her rifle resting across her knees. Her eyes stayed fixed on the path behind them, listening for pursuit. Aaron watched her for a moment before speaking. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. She didn't look at him, but there was the faintest curve to her mouth. "Neither are you," she replied. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant rumble of the engines searching elsewhere. For now, they had escaped, but the cost had been high, and the journey was far from over. The day was fading into a deep red sky. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the wasteland. Aaron leaned against the rock wall. Under the overhang, his breathing slow but still labored. Kareth sat nearby, rifle across her knees, her sharp eyes scanning the open land ahead. For the first time since they'd met, there was no immediate sound of pursuit. She glanced at him, noticing the strain in his face. The bandage she'd tied around his shoulder was already soaked through. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Aaron gave a small nod, pushing himself up with effort. "Which way?" he asked. Kareth pointed toward the distant ridge where the land dipped out of sight. "There's a canyon path," she explained. If we follow it, we can reach my people's abandoned comms relay. I can send a signal. They began. Moving again, Kareth supported him now, her arm around his waist. The heat of the day was fading, replaced by the cool bite of the night wind. Aaron's steps were heavy, but he didn't complain. She noticed this, the same stubbornness he had shown when carrying her across the battlefield. Now the weight had shifted, and she bore him without hesitation. The canyon path was narrow and winding, its walls high enough to hide them from distant eyes. Shadows clung to every bend. Twice, Kareth stopped suddenly, her ears catching faint echoes from above, but no enemy appeared. Step by step, they pressed on until the broken spire of the old comms relay came into view, leaning slightly as if exhausted from years of wind and storms. When they reached it, Aaron sank to the ground with a grunt. Kareth knelt by the rusted access panel, prying it open with the tip of her blade. Inside, dust-covered controls flickered weakly, still holding traces of power. Her hands moved quickly, entering old Dravik codes that she prayed hadn't been forgotten. Finally, the comms unit gave a faint beep. The signal was sent. She exhaled slowly, sitting back against the wall. Now, we wait, she said. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't the tense quiet of hiding. It was a pause before something unknown. Aaron leaned his head back, looking at her. You think they'll come? He asked. She nodded, though her expression was unreadable. They will, she said, but I don't know if they'll welcome you. Aaron gave a faint smirk. Wouldn't be the first time someone didn't like me, he said. She tilted her head, studying him. You could leave, she said. Find your own people again. His gaze stayed on her, steady and sure. I could, he replied, but that's not my plan. Before she could ask what he meant, the low roar of engines filled the air. Kareth was on her feet instantly, gripping the rifle. Two small dropships appeared over the ridge, their silhouettes dark against the crimson sky. The first ship bore the markings of her people. The second was human, battered but unmistakable. She blinked in surprise, her eyes shifting to Aaron. You called your people too? She asked. He shook his head slowly. No, he said. They must have been tracking me. The dropships landed side by side, kicking up clouds of dust from the Dravik ship. Armored warriors stepped out, their eyes locking on Kareth from the human ship. Soldiers moved toward Aaron, their rifles low but ready for a moment. No one moved to enemy factions, standing within meters of each other. Kareth looked between them, then stepped forward, placing herself between Aaron and her own warriors. Her voice was sharp and commanding. He is under my protection, she declared. The Dravik warriors hesitated, their eyes flicking to Aaron from the human side. A commanding officer approached. Aaron, he said, relief in his tone. We thought you were gone. Aaron smiled faintly. Not yet, he replied, glancing at Kareth. Had some help. The tension between the two groups was heavy, but no one raised a weapon. Kareth's people moved to assist her, but she waved them off. Instead, she knelt beside Aaron, her clawed hand resting lightly on his arm. You gave me life when I thought I had none left, she said quietly. Aaron met her gaze. And you gave me a reason to keep going, he replied. The human soldiers helped Aaron toward their ship. The Dravik warriors waited for Kareth to follow. But before stepping onto her dropship, she turned back to him. We will meet again, human, she said, her voice carrying a weight of certainty. He smiled. Count on it. The dropships lifted off together, rising into the fading light. Below them, the wasteland stretched out, empty and silent. Two survivors, once enemies, now bound by something stronger than war. And though they flew in different ships toward different worlds, both knew this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning.